previous sort of Mug Author talk, we were talking about how we all get very invested in our characters and some of the challenges, the good sides of that and some of the negatives of that. And I'm really happy that Lewis is on this week because I would say that the majority of writers do get invested in their characters, sometimes to their detriment. And I think it's somewhat rare, maybe I'm overstating it, but I think it's somewhat rare to find a writer who doesn't get over-invested in their characters and can kind of keep that steel-eyed clarity. And I think Lewis might be one of those few. So I guess I want to ask to start with, do you get invested in your characters? And if not, sort of, is there a strategy you can share with the rest of us? And or just kind of tell us your process about how you think about your characters and why you don't find yourself getting too invested.
Well, I used to, whenever I was younger, early 20s, when I was really getting going and I started selling stories to magazines for the first time, I was really into it. But I found out that it is detrimental to me. I did form strong attachments, but it's not good for me to do that. And I went through a period of about 7 years where I didn't publish. My first book came out. I was expecting to take the world by storm. I got punched square in the mouth by life, and I quit writing for a while, at least for profit. When I came back 7 years later, that was one of the rules I established for myself was do not get attached to anything. And it was actually really easy. Because they're just stories, and I've got thousands of them. It's not like I've only got one or two and I'm holding on to them like they're money. I've got a database of thousands and thousands of story ideas. I can pull anything out anytime I want to work on something. The point is, I just don't get attached. It's not that I hate my characters. I don't feel anything. I don't like, oh, it's so sad. She died.
You're like the Zen Buddhist. You like have the Zen Buddhist philosophy of writing philosophy in a way, it sounds like, like of not getting attached. Yeah. Or is that a fair label to use?
Well, I mean,
because I think of, the still
Jedi, but
Jedi. Maybe
I'm a nerd,
maybe Buddhist
so
too. Yeah, maybe more like a Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like this. So the way you present it is like just not being attached to worldly things, kind of things. Yeah.
So for me, it's more like chess. I've got to move pieces around on the board to achieve victory at the end, and victory is a well-balanced and well-written story. And if I've got to, throw somebody in a wood chipper to make it happen, then that's what happens. And if I've got to, do bad things to good people, that's the nature of story. We don't like reading stories where nothing but good stuff happens to people. Mm-hmm. We like to see, the people get put into the furnace and see whether or not they burn or not.
Yeah. Well, and Gail and I were talking about how we are okay putting our characters through hell, but it's killing off characters where we really struggle. Which sometimes, to raise the dramatic stakes, killing off a character is actually the right thing to do, even as much as it pains me to say that.
I think we overuse that now. Yeah. A lot of us are influenced by TV, for better or worse. And two of the most popular TV shows of the last 20 years, Game of Thrones and Walking Dead, that was their thing. They would just kill off major characters seemingly at random in some cases. Mm-hmm. You would start to get attached to somebody and, bam. I remember one in particular on The Walking Dead. After they had gone and they cleared out the prison, there was this one really funny guy, kind of goofy, and he's out there and he's giving a speech to one of the other characters and just talking and everything. And he's just, like, oh man, this guy's going to be great. And the next thing you know, he just gets shot right through the neck. And that's it. And he was maybe in 3 episodes. He looked like he was going to be a long haul kind of character. No, he was gone like 3 episodes. And it was just, it was upsetting, and it is, you're like, oh, and there's like this emotional thing.
Yeah.
But yeah. I think after a while we become numb to that sort of stuff. I see all these memes where these writers on Facebook are like very cleverly talking about how they're going to kill somebody off. And I'm like, you're just jumping on a bandwagon. It's really silly to just kill somebody for the sake of killing them, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I try to do it sparingly, but when I do it, I have no problem pushing the button on it.
Okay. And of course, in another sense, at least most of us can't help it. Like you're literally, in a sense, invested in some of your characters, and in the sense, like the Johnny Hardwood series, you've invested a lot of time and energy because that's a whole series, and so obviously you're invested in that most literal sense of the word, invested. Otherwise, to truly never be invested in your characters in any sense, you'd have to write, I guess, only short stories or single book series. But
I can still, it's still possible to get invested in characters in a short story. It's just you spend less time with them, so it's less likely you're going to find something.
Right.
But a really good writer is going to be able to make you feel something in 3 pages. He doesn't.
Right.
A really good writer doesn't need 5,000 pages to get their point across.
Oh yeah.
And and as I told you not too long ago, I've already killed Johnny. I know exactly how he dies. And I mean, yeah, and he's my flagship signature character. But I mean, he's like everybody dies. It's just I know how he goes. And if and when I get to the end of the series, I know exactly what's happening. Because a character like that doesn't sail off into the sunset. He puts himself in danger constantly. Shit's eventually going to catch up with him, one way or the other. He's, the Reaper's coming, and so I mean, it's just a matter of when and how.
Kind of on a tangent, but sort of related to that. Is it ever possible to know too much as the writer? In other words, I think it was Tolkien who kind of intimated how he, as much as he liked world building, he intentionally left parts of that world building vague, kind of murky. Do you always want to know for sure what's going to happen to your character in the distant future, or is that just like for Johnny Hardwood it made sense, but would you always want to do that? Know, for example, your character's future and that sort of thing?
I have 4 series that I've got that I'm working on and putting things out on it, and I know the fates of 3.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, one guy, I mean, when you first meet him, he has terminal cancer. So I mean, we know how he's going. Yeah. But the other, there's one other character. I don't really know his fate, and I'm kind of keeping it open-ended. That's fine. But it's one of the reasons why I'm a hybrid planner pantser type. They call them plantsers. I have a speech impediment, so I have a real hard time with that word, plantser. Yeah. It is. So, I plan as much as I can, but I have to keep things open because I have to keep it interesting for me. And knowing every single little detail. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I did the thing with Johnny Hardwood because the entire series was written for my dad, who passed away last year. And I went through a period last year where I was like, do I even want to continue writing these things? But I knew exactly how I wanted to end it because it would be interesting and special to him. And so, because, I'm not giving it away. But I mean, when I was a kid, he grew up, he would come up with stories, cowboy stories to tell me. And he had this character he called Cactus Jack. And he would have Cactus Jack have all these adventures. And when I got to where I was aging out of sitting on his lap and listening to him tell stories, he told me the last story. And it's after Cactus Jack is much older and he has one last adventure and he's out on the prairie with his horse and all this other stuff. And he goes to sleep one night and never wakes up, dies in his sleep. And he told me that story and it made me really sad when I was a little kid, but I always remembered that story. And so when I conceived of the Johnny Hardwood character, I knew I wanted to do the same thing for him. I wanted to, that was kind of my wink to my father,
Yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah. So, but I mean, he's never going to get to read it now, but I get to share it with everybody else.
Yeah. And in a sense, his legacy just lives on in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. The getting invested in your characters thing, you know, I've gotten better at it. I think maybe a lot of times young writers, and I'm not saying for this for sure, but I think when I was a younger writer, a newer writer, newer to writing, I was more likely to just dive forth and get invested right away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as you become a more seasoned writer, you learn to balance, you know, how much you love your characters with all the other parts of the story and the complexity that is a story. Excuse me, jeez Louise.
That's okay.
Um,
Wow, man.
I lost my voice.
Get that teacher frog going on.
Yeah, seriously.
So do you find early in your career, did you find you were putting pieces of people you love into these characters? Was that helping form the emotional attachment, or were you creating people that were familiar to you? And I mean, I'm trying to understand why you get emotionally invested.
No, I've always just been really naturally, really highly empathetic, you know,
Yeah.
maybe sometimes to my own detriment. I mean, I would say that I definitely inserted, like, for example, I grew up in a very healthy family life. So
Yeah.
I sometimes lean towards depicting families in a more positive light than I think a lot of writers do. You know,
Yeah.
I think, you know, that really affects you if you're raised by a loving two loving parents. It just affects, you tend to write characters more that have loving parents, as opposed to, you know, if you are raised in a broken family, I could see how you'd want to work through those, because you're working your issues out, you know, in your own life through your characters in some way, even subconsciously, whether you realize it or not. But so yeah, no, I don't think I had that issue. But I think getting too invested in my characters, I think what more would happen, especially as the new writer, is you automatically assume that other people are going to empathize with your character. And as a more seasoned writer, I realized, like, okay, I got to put the pieces in place.
Yeah.
And maybe, you know, maybe that's, you know, make sure you have an encounter early on in the story, or throw the reader right in the midst of it and show what the character's doing to get the reader actually invested in your character, as opposed to just, you know, the typical, you know, slow, you know, introduction, like, this is what my character's wearing, this is what my character looks like. You know, I think when I was a newer writer, I was more likely to go with that more formulaic opening of just, you know, thinking like, oh, it has to go in this order. And of course people will like my character because it's my character.
Right.
You know, it's like
And my
you
mom
learn
said I'm a
fast.
genius. Yeah.
Yeah, you learn fast, like that's not the way it
No.
works. um which is why I like, and this is a little crazy, but one thing, an exercise I do to myself is, I will, like, if I'm curious about a new author, I
Mhm.
will open their book in the center of their book and start reading and see if it can grip me. And if I can just open to a random page in the middle of the book and suddenly find myself gripped by the story, to me, that's a really good sign. Okay, I'm going to like this author, a writer, and then I go back and read the book. I don't worry about spoilers. I don't worry about any of that. I want to know if I just get thrust in the middle of things, can I get invested in the characters? And to me, if I can, that's a really good green flag. Um, which
I
actually
can't
I
do
did.
that.
Which I don't think I've met anyone who does that, to be honest. But it's fun to do because I like trying to figure out what's going on, and I like the challenge of it. Again, this is maybe just a crazy thing only I do, because I have yet to hear of anyone else who does this.
I used to do it when I would go over to my grandmother's house, because that was where all the sex scenes were in the romance books, was right there in the middle.
Oh,
I would read them.
yeah, this has nothing to do with that. This is like, I'll give you an example. Martha Wells. So I love Martha Wells.
Oh
Um,
man, you have gushed over Martha Wells so
you guys have
often.
heard me gush over her, but it's
Yeah.
always over her sci-fi stuff that I gush over. So this is the
Hmm.
very first time that I've ever gotten one of her fantasy books, and I'm like,
Oh,
you know
okay.
what? I don't know how she's, you know, her fantasy writing might be very different. I may not like it. Who knows? So I literally, like, jumped into the middle of the book here,
Yeah.
and suddenly, like 50 pages later, I realized, okay, I really love this story. And I love her fantasy every bit as much, even though it is very different in some ways. So yeah, so I don't know. I think it's a shortcut that I use for, you know, figuring out if I'm going to like a new writer.
Well, if it works, it works, and it's clearly working for you. You find quite a few good new writers. I have a real difficulty with new books, and you seem to be much better at finding new people than I am. I tend to live in the past with my books, and you're very much like, let's look at these new guys, which is good. It's positive. It's healthy. We're trying to build the new generation here, right? So you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I guess the last thing, just to kind of close up the conversation,
Yeah.
I think that as I've gotten more okay putting my characters through lots of tough situations and trauma and stuff, I haven't worried about getting too invested in them. I do have this, though. I will say this, and I don't know, this probably doesn't apply to you because I know Johnny Hardwood's more of the hard-boiled noir detective, but I sort of see it as a really positive thing. If I'm writing a really sad scene, and I can be crying as I'm writing it, to me, I'm doing something right. But I'm not saying that if I'm crying, I'm going to write the scene better necessarily, but that's what I strive for. I think it's more just personally, I want to fully immerse myself in the story because I think that will make me a better writer in some sense.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I actually, that is what I strive for. If I'm writing a really sad scene and my characters are crying, then in theory, I want to have teary eyes as well.
I get that.
But yeah,
I've had a couple of stories that I wrote that I got a little misty on, but
this is admitted for all eternity that
but
I'm
this is early 20s though. Again, if I wrote those stories today, I'd be like, yeah, that's pretty good. 33, and then I'm done. But like from a nuts and bolts perspective, one of the things about not being emotionally invested is when it comes time to edit. And see, everybody else hates editing, and I love it. I love that because that's when the story comes together for me. It doesn't come together in the rough draft. My rough draft is garbage. As evidence, if you want to go on to No Vacancy, I think it's episode 22. I clearly hit send without editing it, and I didn't realize that. I've got to fix that this morning. It's garbage, and I'm like, geez, I didn't realize I'd done that. But so not getting invested in these characters does two things. First of all, I think when people create flaws for their characters, they either think they're very clever for having done it and they make those flaws very precious, or they don't want to add flaws. They want to create that almost that Mary Sue kind of character.
Yeah.
And so to clear up, when we talk about Mary Sue, we're talking about the actual definition and not the new feminist thing where it's supposed to be some kind of thing where we're taking down women. That's not how it was originally intended. The character was there and could do everything. And
or Marty Stu.
Exactly, as evidenced by the fact there is a Marty Stu as well. The concept was never to diminish female characters. It was a character that was created that was like just good at everything. Yeah. Okay. So we have that tendency to not want to put those bad things in, or we think we're just look at me, or we have the bro kind of writer, and we're seeing more of those guys, unfortunately. And it's like, I think the major like flaw to my character is he's like maybe too awesome, and it's like, oh my God, you suck so bad. And so, I feel like I have an advantage there because I'm not getting emotionally invested in these people. And so when I make a character kind of a little bit of a dick, I don't feel like proud of myself. I'm like, okay, I've added a facet to this guy that makes him a little more interesting. He's kind of a deadbeat dad. He doesn't really, he's like a really good police detective, but he doesn't go to soccer games. I mean, and I know that's kind of a typical sort of flaw for these kind of characters, but I'm using that as an example. Yeah. I would never actually use that.
Because that's a great point. Like, that's one of the big advantages now that I think of it. Like, you can edit so much more successfully than someone, because that's a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times what stems from that writer who cannot cut stuff that really needs to be cut.
Yes.
It's like, but people
That's
need
the
to know
point I
that my
was
main
getting
character
at.
is a great cook. They need to know that he once wrote a history book about such and such. And it's like, is that really, germane to the story? Like, is that really, or is that getting us sidetracked? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is
So
that yeah. So is it central to the character, or is it it could be window dressing. But man, if you plop the he's a really good cook into the middle of a scene where it's like him and another guy having a shootout, and he stands up and he says, "I can make, like a perfect pasta primavera," and then he's back down again. I mean, and all the ladies are like, "I love pasta primavera." If that's why you did it, that sucks. And so yeah, that's exactly where it helps me. I love editing because I'm not sitting there going, "Oh, Scott's a wonderful guy." I would chop Scott completely out of a book. I have no compunctions about, just
no,
removing.
anyone named Scott, whoever watches this, will now hate us. But keep going.
I don't give a shit. No, I've never known anything but nice Scots in my time. I've never known a mean Scot. But yeah, but it allows me to just to see what is necessary. Again, it's chess pieces, and I'm trying to win. I'm trying to create the good story. And I'll knock out entire chapters. I'll take out entire storylines if I have to get to the lean mean story. It's all about cutting it out, and by removing myself emotionally, I can do that. For other people, when they're really into these characters, they don't want to cut that line. They don't want to chop out that piece of dialogue, and that piece of dialogue can do the worst thing in the world, which is take the reader out of the story. If they're reading your book, and then all of a sudden they hit this weird line or whatever that doesn't feel like it should go there, they're going to do this. And they're going to kind of stare around the room. And when you don't have their eyes on your page, then you have a chance to have lost them. They're going to get up, they're going to go do something else for a while, and they're going to forget you're there.
I love your analogy of comparing writing to a game of chess, by the way. That is just, I think I've never heard that before, but I love it. And the other thing, so I have found, like, there is one trick if you're one of those writers who does that, who gets overinvested, sort of around, like, you got to trick yourself, trick your own brain. So one thing that I do is when I'm editing, I save obsessively every single version. So I know no matter what I cut out or what I tweak or whatever, I have a record saved of every, if I ever want to theoretically bring anything back in that I've cut out, I can do that. And I think just the knowledge that all that extra content is there that I cut out, if I ever need it, that's enough of a security blanket for me that I can leave it on the cutting room floor, so to speak, and I don't obsess over it. But again, I'd have to kind of trick my own brain. Like if you were like, if you were like, John, I'm going to edit your story, and anything I delete, it's deleted for good. Oh, I would have heart palpitations, man. It'd be rough.
Well, so what I do when I start a big project, and I don't do this with short stories, but if I'm doing like anything novella or longer, I create what's called a dump file. And anything, when I'm doing content edits, anything that gets taken out gets put in the dump file, cut and paste. And
Okay.
I save all. I have something like 60 or 70,000 words worth of Johnny Hartwood stuff that's been cut out, and it's lore. It's things I can put in later. As a matter of fact, I was talking not too long ago, and I said I could probably construct an entire adventure just off of the things that I have deleted. I could take it all and rearrange it and make a,
cool
like,
idea.
yeah, kind of like what's his name, the naked lunch guy, Burroughs. He, the cut, he would cut up a story and rearrange it and all that. I could basically do that with all the Johnny Hartwood stuff that I've deleted, and I could probably make an adventure out of it. Definitely. I mean, and and we just, I don't like, I can't save version after version. I did that with my second novel, trying to be all writerly and everything. I couldn't do it. I've still got like 7 different versions of it, and it drives me nuts. Because
might try-
as
I
long
might
as
try
those
your-
versions exist, it freaks me out. It's like
I might try your strategy. I might try your approach with my next longer story and do a dump file, like you said. That seems like it would work as well.
I don't arrange. As I cut, I go to the bottom of the file and I put that in. It is a jumble. Other people, I would probably recommend that they order it in some way, but I have the way my brain is wired, I function better in a mess than I do with lots of, structure and all that. So, yeah.
Very cool.
Mhm.
All right. Well, that wraps up our discussion on getting overly invested in your characters and how to not do that.